Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Mark Davis was a 23-year-old student struggling to make ends meet. His life in a small Texas town was a constant hustle between late-night study sessions and part-time jobs. It wasn't easy. His father had passed away a few years ago, leaving behind a mountain of debt that Mark was now responsible for. With tuition fees piling up and his mother's health deteriorating, Mark felt like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. He tried to balance everything, but it was clear he couldn't keep up for long. As he walked to campus on a rainy afternoon, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to lose everything he had worked so hard for. Then, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered, his voice weary. "Mark Davis? This is Eleanor Brooks. I'd like to meet with you about your financial situation." Mark frowned, confused. Who was this woman, and how did she know about his troubles? Eleanor's voice was calm, almost commanding as she continued, "I know all about your debts, the ones your father left behind. I can help you, but we'll need to talk. Meet me at Brooks Bistro at 7 p.m. The call ended before Mark could protest. He had no choice but to go. At 7 p.m., Mark arrived at Brooks Bistro, the rain still pouring outside. He entered the warm, inviting restaurant, wiping the water off his jacket. The place felt like it belonged to a different world, luxurious, almost intimidating. As he made his way to the corner table, he saw her. Eleanor Brooks sat there, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked every bit the powerful businesswoman she was rumored to be. Her piercing blue eyes met his, and she gestured for him to sit. Mark hesitated for a moment before taking his seat, his heart racing. "Mr. Davis, I'm sure you're wondering why I've called you here," she said, her voice steady and businesslike. "You've been living with the weight of your father's debts for too long. I can offer you a way out, a way to secure your future. I want you to marry me." Mark stared at her in disbelief, not sure if he'd heard her correctly. Eleanor calmly set down her cup of tea and continued, "It's not about love, Mark. It's a business arrangement. I'll pay off all your debts, ensure your financial security, but in exchange, you will marry me and share my name. Think of it as a contract. Nothing more, nothing less." Mark blinked, still processing her words. He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised her hand to stop him. "I know this sounds crazy," she said, her eyes narrowing as she studied him, "but you're young, unattached, and you need help. I don't need love. I need a companion, someone who can stand by me in public and fulfill a specific role in my life. I'll take care of everything else." "What do you say?" Mark was taken aback. He had never imagined his life taking such an unexpected turn. He didn't know what to say, but he knew one thing: he had no other option. As Eleanor patiently waited for his response, Mark felt a mixture of disbelief and desperation. He thought of his mother's mounting medical bills and his own growing debts. He didn't have the luxury of rejecting this offer, no matter how strange it sounded. "I'll do it," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Eleanor gave him a small smile, almost satisfied. "Good. The arrangements will be made immediately. We'll get married next week." As Mark sat there, still in shock, he couldn't help but wonder what had he just agreed to? Mark left the bistro that night, his mind racing. He had just signed up for something that was more than a business deal. It was a complete change of his life. He walked through the rain, barely noticing the cold as he tried to process what had happened. Eleanor was not just any woman. She was a billionaire, a powerful businesswoman with a plan. And now, he was a part of it, whether he liked it or not. The next day, Mark found himself at a courthouse in a suit he never thought he would wear. It was all happening too fast. A week ago, he had been a struggling student with no clear path ahead, and now here he was, standing in front of Eleanor Brooks, about to sign his life away for a promise of financial security. Eleanor had arranged everything: the wedding, the documents, even the lawyer. Mark could hardly believe it, but he couldn't back out now. His mind kept flashing to his mother's hospital bills, the rent, the mounting debt. He had no choice. The ceremony was simple, almost clinical. Eleanor, ever composed, looked stunning in a dark dress that contrasted sharply with the sterile, impersonal setting of the courthouse. There were no flowers, no vows of love, just a cold exchange of rings and signatures. Mark barely registered the officiant's words. It was all a blur. Eleanor's lawyer handed over the contract, which Mark signed without a second thought. He could feel the weight of his decision, the finality of it settling deep in his chest. As they walked out of the courthouse, the rain had stopped, and a quiet, uneasy calm had taken over Mark's mind. Eleanor turned to him, her face still as unreadable as ever. "Welcome to your new life, Mr. Davis," she said with a faint smile. Mark felt the chill of her words, even though her expression was warm. This was not a love story. This was a business deal, plain and simple. He nodded stiffly, unsure how to respond. The drive to her mansion was long and silent. The house loomed in front of him, impressive but intimidating. It was the kind of house Mark had only seen in movies: grand, with tall columns, pristine white walls, and perfectly manicured gardens. The gates opened as they pulled up, and Mark couldn't help but feel small and out of place. Eleanor led him inside, her heels clicking on the marble floor as they walked through the grand entrance. Inside, the house was just as immaculate as the outside. The grand foyer was adorned with expensive artwork, the soft glow of chandeliers lighting up the space. It was beautiful, but it felt hollow. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that he was entering a world he didn't belong in. Eleanor led him through the house, showing him his new room, a guest suite in the West Wing. The room was luxurious, of course, with a king-sized bed, plush velvet curtains, and a view of the sprawling estate outside. But to Mark, it felt like a prison. He was a guest here, nothing more. After Eleanor left, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the walls. It was hard to believe how much had changed in such a short amount of time. He had gone from struggling to make ends meet to living in a mansion with a woman he barely knew. He wasn't sure how to feel. This wasn't what he had imagined for his life. He had dreamed of a future with stability, yes, but never like this. And yet, there was a part of him that couldn't deny the relief he felt. The weight of his debts had lifted, and for the first time in a long time, he could breathe easier. That night, Eleanor hosted a small dinner for Mark in the dining room. The table was set for two, the meal exquisite: steak, roasted vegetables, and fine wine. They sat across from each other, and Mark tried his best to make conversation, though the silence between them was thick. Eleanor seemed unfazed by it, focused on her meal as if this was just another day. Mark, however, could feel the distance between them growing. As the evening wore on, Eleanor casually mentioned the terms of their arrangement again. "This marriage is just a formality, Mark. There's no need for any emotional attachment. I'm not interested in that, and I'm sure you're not either. Our lives will remain separate, except for the public appearances." Her voice was cold, but there was a clarity in it that Mark couldn't argue with. She wasn't asking for love. She was asking for a partnership, a business arrangement. The thought should have been comforting, but it only made him feel more isolated. Mark nodded, pushing his food around his plate. "I understand," he replied, his voice quiet. The words felt hollow, even to him. It was hard to swallow the idea of living this way, knowing that Eleanor's world was so different from his. But he had no choice. He had already signed the papers. He had already agreed to this life. There was no turning back now. Later that evening, as Mark lay in the massive bed, staring at the ceiling, he thought about the future. He was married now, but to a woman who saw him as nothing more than a solution to her problem. He wasn't sure what to make of it all. Eleanor had given him everything he needed: money, security, a roof over his head. But in return, he had given up his freedom, his chance at finding love or happiness on his own terms. And for the first time, Mark wondered if it had all been worth it. As the days passed, Mark settled into his new life under Eleanor's roof. The mansion, though grand, still felt like a strange place to him. He spent most of his time in his suite, trying to adapt to the high society world he had suddenly entered. He attended some of the business meetings Eleanor had arranged, but each time he found himself more and more out of place. He was a stranger in this world of luxury and power, and no matter how hard he tried, it never felt like his own. One evening, as they were attending a charity gala for one of Eleanor's business ventures, Mark couldn't help but notice how effortlessly Eleanor moved through the crowd. She was like a queen in her own kingdom, commanding attention without saying a word. Mark, on the other hand, stood beside her like an invisible shadow. He watched as she exchanged pleasantries with influential guests, her smile perfect, her words calculated. She was everything he wasn't: confident, powerful, and in control. The gala was lavish, with crystal chandeliers hanging above, casting a warm glow over the guests. Waiters in tuxedos circulated with trays of champagne, and the sound of light laughter and soft music filled the air. Mark felt small in this grand setting, the weight of his insecurities pressing down on him. He was here, but he didn't belong here. As Eleanor engaged with other guests, Mark stood alone, nursing a glass of wine, feeling like an outsider. It was then that a soft voice interrupted his thoughts. "Isn't this all a bit much?" Mark turned to find a woman standing beside him. She was in her late 20s, with dark brown hair pulled into a sleek bun and a warm smile that contrasted with the coldness of the event around them. Mark blinked, momentarily surprised. It's a bit overwhelming," he admitted, feeling oddly relieved to hear someone else share his thoughts. The woman smiled knowingly. "It's easy to feel like you're in a fishbowl, isn't it?" She took a sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the room. "I don't know how Eleanor does it. She's always so composed, like she was born for this world. It's like she doesn't need anyone's approval, not even her own." Mark raised an eyebrow, curious. "Do you know Eleanor well?" he asked. The woman nodded. "Oh, we've worked together a few times. I'm Rachel. I'm the head of one of her charity projects. But she's always been this way, untouchable, almost, like she's got a wall built around her that no one can get past." Rachel paused, glancing at Eleanor from across the room. "I admire her, in a way. But I wonder if she ever lets anyone in." Her words hung in the air, making Mark feel uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that Rachel had just said aloud what he had been feeling for days. Eleanor was an enigma, and no matter how much Mark tried to get close, there was always a part of her that remained distant. As the night wore on, Mark couldn't stop thinking about Rachel's words. Eleanor had built this fortress around herself, and he was just one more person standing outside of it, trying to find a way in. But why? Why had he agreed to this marriage in the first place? Was it just for the money and security, or was there something more? Something inside him was starting to question everything. Later that evening, when the gala was winding down, Eleanor turned to him as they were about to leave. "You did well tonight," she said, her voice cool but not unkind. "You handled yourself like someone who belongs in this world." Mark nodded, unsure of how to respond. Eleanor wasn't looking for affection or emotional connection. She didn't need him to be anything other than a convenient partner. The car ride back to the mansion was quiet. Eleanor sat across from him, her expression unreadable. Mark glanced at her, wondering if there was a part of her that ever felt lonely. But before he could ask, she spoke. "We're not here to be friends, Mark," she said, her voice almost cold. "You understand that, right?" Mark swallowed, nodding slowly. Of course, he understood. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. He had no right to expect anything else. As they arrived back at the mansion, Mark walked to his room, feeling the weight of the silence between them. Eleanor was right, there was no room for friendship in this arrangement. But deep down, Mark couldn't help but wonder if, somewhere beneath all the wealth and power, there was more to Eleanor than she was letting on. Days passed, and Mark began to settle deeper into his strange new life. Eleanor remained as distant as ever, and the awkwardness between them hung in the air like a cloud that refused to break. The routine of their marriage had settled into an uncomfortable rhythm: public appearances, dinners, and business events. Mark spent most of his time in the mansion, drifting from room to room, feeling like a ghost in a life that wasn't his own. Eleanor was always busy, and when she wasn't working, she was immersed in the world she had built, a world Mark felt he would never be a part of. One morning, Eleanor left for a business trip, and Mark found himself with the rare opportunity to have the mansion to himself. For the first time since arriving, he walked through the grand hallways without a sense of obligation or performance. He wandered into the library, a large, elegant room with towering shelves filled with books. The scent of aged paper and leather filled the air. Mark ran his fingers along the spines of the books, his mind wandering. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but something about the quiet of the house made him feel a little more at ease. As he sat down on one of the plush chairs, he heard the soft click of the front door. Eleanor was back earlier than expected. Mark stood, unsure of what to do next. But as Eleanor entered the room, she gave him a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "I didn't expect you to be here," she said, her tone soft but still guarded. "I thought you'd be out with the staff, getting to know more about the house." Mark shrugged, not sure how to respond. "I just needed some quiet," he said. Eleanor stepped closer, studying him for a moment. "You know, I think you're getting more comfortable here," she remarked, her eyes scanning the room. "But don't forget the purpose of all this. We agreed to this arrangement for a reason, Mark." There it was again, the cold reminder that this marriage wasn't real. But as she said the words, Mark felt a strange twinge of sadness. Eleanor was right, they both knew the stakes. Yet something about her tone, something in the way she looked at him, made him wonder if she, too, felt trapped in this facade. Later that evening, Eleanor invited him to a private dinner in the dining room. The room was lit by the soft glow of candlelight, and the table was set with fine china and crystal glasses. It was all so extravagant, so carefully curated. Mark felt out of place once again. He took his seat, and Eleanor sat across from him. The silence between them was thick, but this time, Eleanor spoke first. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't the Eleanor he had come to know, the composed, calculating businesswoman. This was a side of her he hadn't seen before. The walls she had built around herself were starting to crack, just a little. "I didn't sign up for this," Mark said, his voice low. "But I'm here now, and I'm trying to make sense of it all." Eleanor nodded, as if she understood. She met his gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. The rest of the dinner was quieter than usual. Mark found himself thinking about what Eleanor had said. It wasn't just a business deal for her, either. There was something deeper in her words, something he hadn't expected. It made him question everything. Why had she chosen this arrangement? Was it just for power? Or was there something more, something hidden beneath her cold exterior? He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Eleanor than he had ever realized. That night, after dinner, Mark found himself walking the grounds of the mansion. The moon was full, casting a silver glow over the manicured gardens. He walked along the cobblestone path, trying to clear his mind. The silence of the night was calming, but it also gave him too much time to think. He wondered what would happen next. Would this empty arrangement ever turn into something real? Or was he always going to be a pawn in Eleanor's world? As he sat on a bench in the garden, Mark heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Eleanor standing a few feet away, watching him silently. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the distance between them growing more palpable with every passing second. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never wanted this life, Mark," she said. "But now that you're here, I don't know what to do." The vulnerability in her words surprised him once again. Was this the woman he had been living with all this time, the one who had been so cold, so unapproachable? Mark stood, his heart racing. For the first time, he saw a different side of her, one that was raw and real. And as he looked at her, something shifted inside him. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them both to find something more than just a contract. The following days were a strange mix of routine and moments of unexpected clarity. Mark and Eleanor's interactions remained professional, but there was a subtle shift in their dynamic. They began to talk more, not just about business, but about life in general. It was still awkward, still distant, but it was a start. Eleanor, for the first time, seemed willing to let her guard down, if only just a little. She no longer gave him cold, detached orders or ignored him in the presence of others. She still maintained the boundary between them, but there was a softness in her eyes now, something Mark hadn't noticed before. One evening, after a long day of business meetings, Eleanor invited Mark to join her for a drink in the study. It was a casual invitation, but to Mark, it felt like a step forward. He wasn't used to this side of her, the part that wasn't business-focused or emotionally distant. He walked into the study, and she was sitting by the window, her back to him, gazing out at the darkened garden. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and polished wood, an atmosphere that felt both inviting and intimate. "Come in," Eleanor said without turning around, her voice low but warm. "I thought we could talk for a bit." Mark hesitated but then sat down in the armchair opposite her. He wasn't sure what to expect from this conversation, but he couldn't deny that part of him was curious. "You've been quiet lately," Eleanor continued, her gaze still fixed on the garden. "I can tell something's been bothering you. What's on your mind?" Her words were genuine, not the usual cold business inquiry he had come to expect. Mark didn't know what to say. He had so many thoughts running through his head, so many questions. He looked at her, searching for the right words. "I don't know," he finally said, his voice uncertain. "This whole thing, I never imagined it would be like this. I thought I'd just be in the background, doing what's needed and nothing more. But it's different now. I'm not just playing a part anymore. I'm really here, in your world, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with that." He paused, letting the silence settle. "I don't know if this is enough for me. The deal we made. The way we're living." Eleanor turned around, her expression unreadable. She studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Then she sighed softly and walked over to the bar, pouring herself a drink before offering Mark one as well. He accepted, though he didn't know why. It wasn't like him to drink much, but the gesture felt significant in the moment. She sat down beside him, handing him the glass. "You think I'm happy with this arrangement?" she asked, her tone soft but firm. "I didn't ask for this life, Mark. This life I've built, it's not what I wanted. But I've worked too hard to let it all fall apart. You were right when you said we're both stuck here. But we don't have to stay stuck. Not forever." Mark looked at her, the vulnerability in her voice catching him off guard. He had always seen Eleanor as someone who had it all together, someone who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. He had never imagined that she, too, might be feeling the weight of their arrangement. For a moment, there was silence. Then Eleanor set her glass down and met his gaze. "I don't expect you to love me, Mark. I don't even expect us to have a traditional marriage. But there's something between us now, something more than just the deal we made. I can't ignore it anymore." She paused, as if she were deciding whether to say more. "I'm not asking for anything from you. But I think we need to figure out what this is. Whatever it is. Because I don't want to keep living this half-life, and I don't want you to either." Mark felt his heart race as he processed her words. He had expected her to maintain her distance, to continue with the cold professionalism that had marked their relationship from the start. But this was different. Eleanor was giving him a glimpse of something more, something real. He didn't know if he was ready for it, but the thought of continuing in this empty arrangement seemed unbearable. "I don't know what I'm doing either," Mark admitted. "I never thought I'd end up in a situation like this. But maybe there's a chance for us to find something real in all of this. I don't know where it'll go, but I think we owe it to ourselves to try. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor smiled a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. It wasn't the smile of a businesswoman closing a deal or a woman trying to keep control. It was the smile of someone who, for once, wasn't afraid to let someone in. Mark didn't know what the future held, but for the first time since he had signed the contract, he felt a sense of possibility. Maybe this wasn't just a business arrangement after all. Maybe there was a chance for something more. The next few days felt different. Mark and Eleanor, despite their unconventional marriage, had begun to find a rhythm. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it was there. They were talking more about things beyond business and obligations. The small moments between them, once cold and formal, were now filled with warmth, even if it was fleeting. Eleanor would make a comment about a book she was reading, and Mark would share his thoughts, or they would simply sit in silence, watching the world outside. They were becoming more than just business partners, they were beginning to learn about each other, piece by piece. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Eleanor returned home earlier than usual. Mark was reading a book in the study, and when he heard her footsteps, he looked up, surprised to see her standing in the doorway, her expression soft but serious. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. Mark put the book down, a sense of unease settling in his stomach. There was something in her tone, something that told him this wasn't just another casual conversation. He stood up, motioning for her to sit down. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with concern. Eleanor hesitated before sitting down on the couch, her hands resting on her lap. She seemed like she was searching for the right words. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about us," Eleanor began, her voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of uncertainty. "I know we agreed to this arrangement marriage, the business deal. But I can't help feeling like we've been living in a bubble. It's not just the contract anymore. There's something more, something I can't ignore." She looked at him, her gaze searching, as though trying to gauge his reaction. Mark felt his heart race, his mind spinning. This wasn't what he had expected. For a moment, he wondered if this was the moment they would finally acknowledge what had been growing between them. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I mean," Eleanor said, taking a deep breath, "that we're both in this together now. And it's not just about the business anymore. It's about us. I've been pushing away these feelings, trying to keep control, but I don't think I can anymore. I can't pretend like this is just a deal, Mark." Her voice was soft, vulnerable in a way Mark had never heard before. Mark stared at her, unsure of how to respond. He had known, deep down, that something had shifted between them, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. Eleanor was admitting it too, the connection they had was no longer just a contract. It was something more. He stood there for a moment, processing her words. Part of him wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but another part of him was afraid. What would this mean for them? What would it mean for the life they had built so far? He had to remind himself that this wasn't just about feelings, it was about choices, and commitments. And he had made a commitment, even if he didn't fully understand what it meant yet. "I don't know where this will go," he said, finally breaking the silence. "I don't know if I'm ready for something real. But I know I don't want to keep pretending. I don't want to keep living in this bubble. If there's a chance for something more, then I think we owe it to ourselves to try." His voice was steady now, his words coming more easily than he had expected. Eleanor's eyes softened as she looked at him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she nodded slowly, her lips curving into a small, tentative smile. "Maybe we should," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. Mark felt a weight lift off his shoulders. It wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a step forward. A promise that they wouldn't just go through the motions anymore, that they would try to build something real, something beyond the business arrangement they had once agreed to. As the evening wore on, they talked more, not about the contract or the marriage, but about life. About their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And for the first time since he had entered Eleanor's world, Mark felt like he wasn't just a pawn in a game, he was a person. And so was she. The next morning, when Mark woke up, there was a new sense of hope in the air. He wasn't sure where this would go, or how things would unfold, but for the first time, he felt like there was a possibility. A possibility that, maybe, this strange marriage of theirs could turn into something more than just a business deal. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to be happy, together. The days that followed were filled with a mix of uncertainty and growing closeness. Mark and Eleanor began to navigate this uncharted territory between them, slowly allowing themselves to step beyond the boundaries of their initial agreement. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't immediate, but there was progress. Eleanor would sometimes catch Mark looking at her in a way that was unfamiliar to both of them, like he was seeing her for the first time. And she, too, found herself paying attention to the small things about him, the way he laughed when he was nervous, the way he cared for his mother even from afar, and how he quietly stepped in to help when things needed doing, even in this world of wealth and power. It was at one of their regular charity events that the tension finally cracked. Mark had been standing near the edge of the crowd, feeling a little out of place as usual. Eleanor, ever the composed and elegant figure, was speaking with donors and shaking hands with influential people. It had become a familiar scene for Mark, but he was beginning to feel more like an observer than a participant. Just then, Eleanor caught sight of him and excused herself from the conversation. She walked over to him with that same cool, confident air, but when she reached him, she paused. "You look out of place," she teased lightly, her eyes twinkling with a softness that made Mark's heart skip a beat. It was the first time she had spoken to him in such an easy, almost playful tone in public. Mark smiled, trying to shake off the uncomfortable feeling. "I'm just not used to all this glamour," he admitted, gesturing to the luxury of the venue. "I think you've got it down to an art." Eleanor laughed, the sound genuine and warm. It was a laugh that seemed to erase the formalities between them, if only for a moment. "You'll get used to it," she said, nudging him gently with her elbow. "Besides, it's not about fitting in here, it's about knowing why you're here. And you're here because you're a part of this now, whether you like it or not." There was something in her voice, an unspoken truth that Mark had been avoiding. He wasn't just here as a placeholder anymore. He was beginning to take up space in this world and in her life, in ways he hadn't anticipated. The conversation turned more serious as they moved to a quieter corner of the event. Eleanor's tone shifted, and Mark could feel the weight of her words. "Mark," she began, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "I know we've been playing this role, this marriage, this business arrangement. But I can't keep pretending that's all it is anymore. It's not enough for me. It's not enough for you either, is it?" Mark swallowed, his throat dry. She was right. The facade they had built around themselves was starting to crumble, piece by piece. He had been lying to himself, convincing himself that he could live with this arrangement. But the truth was, he wanted more. He had begun to care about Eleanor in a way he hadn't expected. And what scared him the most was that he didn't know how to handle it. "I don't want to keep living like this either," Mark confessed, his voice soft but firm. "I can't keep pretending that it's just about business. I want to know what this really is. And I need to know if you feel the same way." Eleanor looked at him, her expression unreadable for a moment. The world around them seemed to fade away as they stood there, facing each other in the middle of a room full of people. Then, slowly, she nodded. "I do," she said quietly. "I feel the same way." Her words hung in the air between them, carrying a weight that neither of them had expected. For the first time in a long while, Mark felt a spark of hope. It was a small thing, but it was real. Eleanor wasn't just a business partner anymore. She wasn't just a woman he had signed a contract with. She was someone he could imagine building a future with if only they could figure out what that future looked like. The next steps were unclear, but for the first time, the uncertainty felt like a chance rather than a burden. The weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings and uneasy adjustments. Mark and Eleanor began to explore the uncharted territory of what could be a real relationship. The walls they had both carefully constructed around themselves slowly started to erode, but the journey was neither simple nor easy. There were moments of vulnerability, small conversations over coffee, shared laughter at the dinner table, but also moments of doubt. Mark often found himself questioning what he truly wanted and whether this was real, or just a fleeting moment in a life filled with uncertainty. One evening, as they walked together through the gardens of Eleanor's estate, Mark found himself thinking more about the future. It was a cool night, the stars scattered across the sky above, and the soft sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only thing breaking the silence. Eleanor was walking beside him, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket, her expression pensive. "Do you ever think about what happens after all this?" Mark asked, his voice low. He wasn't sure what he was asking, he wasn't even sure what he meant. But there was something in the quiet of the night that made him feel like it was the right time to ask. Eleanor glanced at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. Mark hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. "I mean, where do we go from here? This arrangement we have, it's starting to feel real. But I don't know what happens next. I don't know what I want or what you want. I don't even know if we're supposed to want the same things." He stopped walking and turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. Eleanor was quiet for a moment, as if considering his words. She looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I don't have all the answers," she said finally. "But I do know one thing, I don't want to keep living in limbo. I don't want to keep pretending that we don't have the power to change this. What we've built, what we've started to share, it's not just a contract anymore. I don't think it ever was." Her words were quiet, but the sincerity in her voice made Mark's heart skip a beat. Mark felt a surge of emotion rise within him, a mix of hope and fear. "What do you mean by that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eleanor took a step closer to him, her eyes locking with his. "I mean," she began, her voice steady but filled with a quiet intensity, "that we have the chance to build something real. Something we both want. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try." She paused, waiting for him to say something, to respond. But Mark didn't know what to say. All he could do was look at her, the weight of her words settling in his chest. For the first time, Mark realized that this wasn't just about the money or the business deal. This was about the two of them, and what they could create together, if they were willing to put in the effort. He had come into this arrangement thinking it was a temporary solution to his problems, but now, he saw something deeper, something that could potentially last a lifetime. He reached out, taking her hand in his. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. "I don't know if I'm ready for all of it," he admitted. "But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to take that first step with you." Eleanor's expression softened as she squeezed his hand. "That's all I'm asking for," she said, her voice warm with understanding. "We take it one step at a time, together." As they stood there in the quiet of the garden, Mark realized that for the first time in a long time, he felt hopeful. The uncertainty of their future still loomed large, but with Eleanor beside him, he wasn't as afraid of it. Maybe, just maybe, they could create something real out of this. Something neither of them had expected, but both of them now needed. Weeks passed, and the changes between Mark and Eleanor became undeniable. They began to build something new, something neither of them had expected but both were learning to embrace. Eleanor's walls came down piece by piece, and Mark, though hesitant at times, found himself opening up in ways he had never allowed himself before. They still had moments of doubt, still wondered where this would all lead, but the connection between them deepened. They were no longer just two people fulfilling a contract, they were two people figuring out what it meant to be real with each other. One afternoon, Eleanor invited Mark to join her at a private event, a small gathering for her foundation's latest project. It was a stark contrast to the grand galas they had attended together, and Mark could tell that this event was more personal to her. He felt nervous, still adjusting to the idea of being not just her husband, but someone who mattered in her life in ways that went beyond the business. As they arrived at the venue, Eleanor gave him a small smile, her hand resting briefly on his arm. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her voice warm, a hint of humor in it. Mark smiled back, a little unsure but more confident than he had been at their first event together. "I guess I am," Mark replied, taking a deep breath, "but only because you're here." He wasn't sure why those words came out, but as soon as he said them, he realized how true they were. Eleanor's presence had given him the courage to step into this new life, into this world he had never imagined. The evening went smoothly. Eleanor led Mark through the crowd, introducing him to some of her colleagues and donors. There were no formal speeches, no cameras flashing, just quiet conversations about the projects she was passionate about. Mark found himself caught in the warmth of it all. He saw the side of Eleanor that few people ever did, the woman who cared deeply about her work and the people she helped, not just the powerful businesswoman everyone else saw. As the event began to wind down, Eleanor turned to him with a thoughtful look. "You did well tonight," she said, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. Mark could see it now, the pride in her eyes, the way she truly saw him not as just a part of her world, but as someone who belonged there. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to him. "I'm glad I could be here," Mark replied, his voice low. "And I'm glad I'm here with you." He meant it more than he had ever expected to. As they left the event, they walked side by side in the cool night air, their fingers brushing for just a moment before intertwining. For the first time, Mark felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had come into this marriage thinking it was just a way out of his problems, a temporary fix. But now, he realized it was more than that. It was a chance for both of them, a chance to build something real. Later that evening, back at the mansion, Eleanor turned to him with a smile. "You know," she began, her voice thoughtful, "I never thought I'd be here, feeling this way, in this kind of arrangement. But I think I'm starting to believe in it. In us." Mark looked at her, a feeling of warmth spreading through him. "I never thought I'd be here either," Mark admitted, his voice soft. "But I'm glad we're here. Together. And I think we're just getting started." He felt a sense of peace, something he hadn't known in years. He wasn't just living in a world of luxury and power anymore, was living in a world that had real meaning, with Eleanor. As they stood there, together, Mark realized that this wasn't just the end of their journey, it was the beginning of something new, something they could build together. A real future, not dictated by contracts or obligations, but by choice and commitment. For the first time, he felt truly at home. And in that quiet, intimate moment, Mark knew that this, whatever it was everything he had been searching for. Not just a business deal, but a life worth living.